A Chinese diplomat just went on social media and threatened to cut off the filthy necks of foreign meddlers. Chinese warships are parking themselves next to Japanese islands. And Xi Jinping personally called Donald Trump to talk about Taiwan. It all had to do with Japan. But did Japan launch a missile? Did they invade someone? No, this entire mess started because Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, walked into parliament and answered a question. She was asked, "What do we do if China attacks Taiwan?" And she basically said, "We fight." But she didn't just say, "We fight." She used a very specific legal loophole to say it. And that one little sentence might have just blown up 80 years of peace in Asia. Here is the phrase that set everything on fire. Takaichi said, "A Chinese attack on Taiwan would be a situation threatening Japan's survival." Now, to you and me, survival is just a word. But in Japanese law, that word is a cheat code. It lets them sidestep the peace constitution and use force whenever they feel like it. Japan isn't supposed to have a normal army because of the atrocities they committed during World War II. They have a self-defense force. But in 2015, they passed a law that effectively says, if our survival is at stake, we can go fight anywhere. It sounds kind of reasonable, doesn't it? Wait until you see how they have used that survival phrase in the past. Back in 1941, Imperial Japan didn't say, "Hey, let's go do some crimes." They called it a war for self-existence and self-defense. They claimed their survival was threatened and used that excuse to bomb Pearl Harbor. Here's the thing. In all of Japanese history, that word survival has never been used for self-defense. Not even once. It's only ever been rolled out as the excuse to invade someone else. But what really makes China lose it is where Takaichi is pointing that excuse. And that is Taiwan. China sees Taiwan as its own internal affair, and it's been the single biggest red line since Japan and China normalized relations in 1972. Back then, Japan signed the joint communique, where they officially recognized that Taiwan is part of China. So when Takaichi uses the survival invasion playbook and attaches it to what China considers an internal matter, and then flat out refuses to retract it, despite Beijing asking repeatedly, Beijing doesn't hear legal theory. They hear Japan unilaterally ditching the signed agreement and threatening to start a war over Chinese territory, just like they did in 1931 and 1937, using the exact same excuse. Japan isn't just talking tough. They are actually buying the weapons to back it up. For 70 years, Japan promised to be a pacifist nation. They had a sacred rule, never spend more than 1% of GDP on the military. But in 2022, they took that rule and shredded it. While the world watched Ukraine, Japan quietly announced a plan to double defense spending to 2% of GDP. That doesn't sound like much math, but in dollars, it's a monster. It effectively makes Japan the third biggest military spender on Earth. And they aren't buying shields. They are buying spears. Japan is currently building missiles with a range of 3,000 kilometers. You don't need a 3,000-kilometer missile to defend Tokyo. You need it if you want to hit Beijing. They are also actively converting their helicopter destroyers into full-blown aircraft carriers designed for F-35 stealth fighters. They are even debating building nuclear-powered submarines, the kind used to hunt in deep enemy waters. So when Takaichi talks about survival, China doesn't see a scared island nation. They see a country that just spent $300 billion buying a sword and is now looking for an excuse to sharpen it. To Beijing, Takaichi isn't defending the status quo. She is announcing that the empire is back in business. China's reaction was fast, loud, and very on brand. First, the filthy necks comment from the diplomat. Beijing later said, "Relax, that was just his personal opinion," which is diplomatic code for, "We meant it, but we're not signing paperwork for it." Then they went straight for Japan's wallet. China issued a travel warning, "Maybe don't go to Japan right now," and tourism bookings started collapsing. Then Beijing brought back a ban on Japanese seafood. One move hits tourism, one move hits coastal politics. Both moves send the same message. We can hurt you without firing a shot. Then Beijing brought out the lawyers, and they didn't just send a letter. They dusted off a weapon the world forgot existed. It's called the Enemy State Clause. Back in 1945, when the United Nations was founded, they wrote a specific rule into the charter that basically says, if Germany or Japan ever starts acting like an aggressor again, the winners of World War II can stop them with force, without asking for permission. China is pointing at Japan's new aircraft carriers and 3,000 kilometers missiles and saying, look, they are acting like the empire again. Japan thinks they are an ally of the West. China is reminding them that, on paper, they are still the enemy. Now, having a legal permission slip doesn't mean China is going to bomb Tokyo tomorrow. It's unthinkable they would attack while the situation is still developing. But while Japan has been piling up missiles on islands near Taiwan, thinking they have a deterrent, something happened in China last week that really caught everybody's attention. A private Chinese company called Linkhong Tianxing released a promo video for their new product, the YKJ-1000. It is a hypersonic missile, Mach 7, unstoppable, and they are launching it from a standard shipping container on the back of a truck. The company bragged that by using automotive supply chains, literally car parts, they cut the production cost by 90%. While the US spends billions developing one missile, a private Chinese startup just figured out how to mass produce them like Toyota's. The video ended with a computer animation of these FedEx missiles swarming a map. They didn't label the country, but it was shaped exactly like Japan. It wasn't a military drill. It was a sales pitch for the end of the world. And Japan's TV screens did the rest, flashing comparison graphics that make it pretty obvious. China has more ships, more missiles, more planes, and Japan has at least the courage to acknowledge it. While China was threatening necks and setting up legal trapdoor, Japan looked around for its friends. The G7, complete silence. No one wants to be the first to say, yes, let's anger China for Japan. Japan's only real card was the US. Surely, the Americans would back them up. Then came the call. On the 24th of November, Donald Trump talked to Xi Jinping. China said Xi reiterated their position on Taiwan and that the call was great. And Trump went online and bragged about it. What he didn't do was promise anything to Japan. Then he called Sanae Takaichi. And this time, no all-caps post, no great call with Japan, and no promise to stand shoulder to shoulder if things go south. Tokyo got the message, loud and clear. Before that call, Takaichi's camp was breathing fire about survival. After the call, the language magically softened. Suddenly, it was all mutually beneficial relations and constructive dialogue. Trump didn't hand her a green light. He handed her silence and forced her to imagine what a war with China looks like when Japan is fighting it alone. But even if the US did promise to help, it might not matter, because the war might be over before the first American ship arrives. Here's the real sword hanging over Japan's head. It's not missiles. It's dirt, specifically rare earth minerals. China controls the rare earth supply chain. Mining, processing, refining. They own the whole casino. Japan's entire modern economy is built on high-tech manufacturing. Cars, robotics, precision tools, defense systems. All of it needs rare earths. Japan only diversified the light stuff. For heavy rare earths, the specific vitamins that keep EV motors and missile guidance systems from melting, Japan still relies on China for 90% of its supply. Japan does have a backup plan, a factory in Malaysia run by an Australian company called Linus. The problem? It's barely a pilot light. It only started separating heavy rare earths this year, and it produces about 1,500 tons. But Japan's industry eats way more than that before breakfast, and the real mass production there won't start until 2026 or 2027. That gap between now and 2027 is the kill zone. If Beijing pulls the lever, they don't need to fire a shot. They just stop the shipments. Here is what would happen. In the first week, prices would go up 400%. That is what happened in 2010 when they jumped 400% overnight. Then 3 months later, there would be nothing left for Japan's strategic reserves. 6 months after that, companies like Toyota, Honda, and Sony would have empty warehouses. They wouldn't be able to make cars, robots, or PlayStations. Japan's economy doesn't live at the point of a gun, it lives at the end of a Chinese supply chain. Wars don't start with tanks crossing a border. They start when a politician, feeling confident and backed by a $300 billion budget, says one sentence they can't take back. She took the phrase threatening Japan's survival and stapled it onto Taiwan. Takaichi thought she was just clarifying the law with her survival comment. She thought the new missiles and aircraft carriers made Japan strong enough to speak up. Instead, she handed Beijing exactly what they needed: a reason to dust off the 1945 laws, a reason to showcase their new hypersonic missiles, and a reason to remind Tokyo that their entire economy runs on Chinese dirt.